Selena Mackenzie.
DRE.
Lifestyle.
Welcome back to the Lifestyle Show. Now, in December 1940, 25-year-old Mabel Attrill found herself accused of the murder of Frank Cave. But was she guilty? My next guest is the great nephew of Frank Cave and has now done his own research into the case. To tell us more, please welcome to the show Peter James Cave. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Good afternoon, Selena.
Good afternoon. Now, this is more than 70 years ago. What made you decide to do this then?
Well, initially, I wasn't going to write a book, but it was really to establish what happened to my great-uncle Frank, because I really knew nothing about it. I was actually born some 7 years after the events of the shooting, and as a child, adults don't talk about such events, at least not in front of children. So once I started the research, it was not long before I discovered that there are actually several famous people involved, and I think this really intrigued me, so it was probably then that I decided to put pen to paper.
OK. Now, it all took place on the Isle of Wight, I believe.
That's right, yeah.
And it was early one morning in October 1940 on the farm where your great-uncle obviously lived and worked.
That's right, yeah. What actually happened, I think probably some of your listeners would know the village of Godshill on the Isle of Wight, because it's quite famous. It's very picturesque. It's got thatched cottages, old world charm, and it really is a tourist attraction as a quintessential English village. But the farmhouse is actually situated outside of Godshill, probably about 2 miles, and it's very remote, and it's on a narrow country road, and the nearest inhabitants, I suppose, is a small amount of cottages across the road from the farmhouse, and the local pub is about half a mile away. And at the time, as you rightly say, it was run by my Uncle Frank. He had got married just at the turn of the century to a lady called Beatrice, and when they got married, they moved into a small terraced house in Newport, which is the main county town of the island. But in due course, both Frank and Beatrice produced some 9 children, and it was probably that because of obviously the need for a larger accommodation, that Frank took up the business as being a farmer.
Okay. Now, so what you're saying is this is completely in the wilderness, this farm?
It is,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. Now, he was 61 and he was shot with his own shotgun?
That's right, yeah. What happened, by the early 1930s, the marriage of Frank and Beatrice was on a downhill spiral, and in 1934, Beatrice moved out of the farmhouse and went to live with one of their married daughters in one of the cottages just across the road from the farm. Within a year, Frank had taken on a young housekeeper, Mabel Attrill. Now, Mabel was 35 years his junior, and it was her who was charged with Frank's murder.
Why was she charged then?
Well, she said there was a police investigation after the incident, and the police made inquiries, took photographs, etc. And she said that it was an accident that had occurred whilst she was having an argument with Frank. Now, the argument, as she said, was concerning the relationship that Frank had with another woman who used to come over to the farm and go rabbiting with Frank, and her name was Mrs. Ellen Evans.
Okay.
She pleaded not guilty. She was remanded by the Isle of Wight magistrates and committed for trial at Winchester Assizes. And she appeared at Winchester Assizes in the December of 1940.
Right. So What do you think? I mean, it was a notorious wartime murder. It's before my time, but I know people that do remember it. And the trial, it says here, still has many questions which have answers not answered.
Yeah,
questions not answered, sorry.
Several sort of very strange coincidences that actually occurred when I was doing the research. And one of the really strange occurrences was that by an odd twist of fate, Mabel wasn't the only woman from the Isle of Wight who was fighting for her life at Winchester Assizes. The actual case before Mabel's case was a lady from Sandown on the Isle of Wight by the name of Dorothy O'Grady. Now, Dorothy O'Grady was the only woman during World War II to actually be charged as a spy, and she was found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, obviously, this must have filled Mabel with a great sense of impending doom, because one of the post-mortem that had been carried out on Frank Cave was actually carried out by Sir Bernard Spilsbury. Now, Sir Bernard Spilsbury was probably the most famous pathologist in the UK during the early 20th century. And having conducted the post-mortem, he also gave evidence for the Crown at the Assizes. Some of your listeners will probably know the case that made Spilsbury famous, and that was the case of Dr. Crippen. And Crippen, as we know, was the first case that the newly invented telegraph system had been used in connection with an arrest, and this caused considerable press coverage and public interest. And Spilsbury gave evidence at the Old Bailey concerning, because Crippen was charged with the murder of his wife, and the evidence that Spilsbury gave was that when they'd found portions of the human body in the basement of Crippen's house, Crippen concluded that on one small portion of the human body was an appendix scar, and apparently Crippen's wife had had an appendix operation earlier, so that was really sufficient for the jury to find him guilty of murdering his wife, and he was duly hung.
So as far as Mabel Attrill's concerned, what were your conclusions after you wrote the book? What do you think?
Very difficult, actually, because one thing that I think had a great effect on it was that Spilsbury and also the director of the police laboratory at Hendon had concluded that the gun was actually fired from a distance of some 6 feet, and Frank Cave was actually shot in the back. Now, as Mabel was argued that this happened during the argument, and the gun went off by accident. Mabel, her defence counsel was a man by the name of Joshua Caswell. Now, Caswell had pursued an appeal all the way to the House of Lords some 5 years prior to Mabel's case. And this ended, and it was probably the most important case on evidence in English criminal law, and it was called Wilmington and the Director of Public Prosecutions. The case there actually bore resemblance to what happened at East Appleford Farm some 6 years later. In the case of the shooting and the subsequent killing was claimed to be an accident. Now, this appeal case had dramatic effects on English law, and it also, I think, had an effect on the result of Mabel's trial.
OK. The book is called Death in Godshill. It's by Peter James Cave, I'm speaking to today. It's published by Memoirs Publishing. Is it out now, Peter?
It is indeed, Serena, yes.
Excellent.
It's been out for about 6 weeks.
Excellent, and I'm sure you can get it from all the major bookshops and obviously from Amazon and also from audible.co.uk, who's on our website. Well, it sounds intriguing. I'm going to get a copy of the book myself and see what I can figure out from it. But Peter Cave, for the moment, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Selina.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.